Welcome to the 99 Podcast, a ministry of Crossroads Grace Community Church in Manteca, California. I'm Heather Mahoney, and I'm excited that you're joining us for Season 2 of the 99 Podcast. We hope it challenges you and creates a hunger to dive deeper into Scripture so you can know Jesus better. We have Preston Kulesha and Brian Hunt joining us for today's episode. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, you guys. Hey, Brian, we actually had a question submitted online asking about how Pastor Jimmy is doing. Do you have any good news you can share for us?
Well, number one, Pastor Jimmy still is amazing. I know he listens, so we want to make sure we say, what's up, Pastor Jimmy? We love you. And you know what? It's a long road. He's definitely got a long road to go, but he's getting better. We're praying for right arm mobility and for just some clarity of mind at this point. So he's doing a lot better. A long road to go, but we just want to continue to pray for Jimmy and for Tanya. She's doing all the things, working full-time, taking care of Jimmy, but we pray that everything will continue to progress really, really well. And what he's told me over, in fact, he sent me a message before we even got on here, was that he just loved how the church was loving on them so well, supporting them so well. And I think it's just neat to be able to see when you know you've got a great church, but then you get to see that great church in action. He says the church is doing amazing things for us, honestly, and just continue prayers, everybody, for physical and cognitive healing for me and for peace for Tanya and all the stuff that she has to do. So there's an update. Just keep praying for him. We love him.
All right, sweet. Okay, 2 specific prayer requests, for his
right arm mobility
and the right arm mobility, and obviously the family as an entire.
Yes. So thanks for asking. Whoever asked that question, we appreciate that. And Marcella.
Thank you, Marcella.
Woohoo. Yeah, so he's doing good, but keep praying for him.
Sweet. Thank you. Hey, Preston, let's jump right in. We often say at the 99 that some of what we're talking about got cut on the cutting room floor, and you had so much goodness that we had to cut some of it out of your message.
Oh boy.
And some of it were some fun, weird laws. You had talked about real rules and then unwritten rules. And so did you remember any of those weird laws that you cut out of your message that we didn't get to share?
Yeah, most of them were memories of Arizona growing up.
Okay.
I feel like we were very scared of some of these laws growing up. We talked about them a lot in school. One of which it is, I think this is not just Arizona, but it was illegal to own a hedgehog. And I had a friend who owned a hedgehog, and we treated it like we were like rebels, the rebelest of rebels. We were breaking so many international laws. Like we would talk like in such hushed whisper at school on the playground, like, "How's your hedgehog doing? Don't tell anyone." Like the feds were gonna come get us. But I remember that one.
What was its name?
Oh, I could make one up, but I don't know.
If
Harry
it's not
sounds
Sonic,
right.
what are we doing?
All right, Sonic would be good. That's probably the basic. That's the Kevin of hedgehog names. But
I have a cousin with the dog named Kevin.
It's the
Kevin McAllister from Home Alone, but still.
I know Kevin McAllister. Yeah. Why are you hating on dogs named Kevin?
Listen, my dog's name is Winston, so I shouldn't be hating on any dog's name. But so there's that one. I remember that it was illegal to damage a saguaro cactus. And I remember knowing that because me and my brother were in the desert throwing big rocks at cacti. And some neighborhood kids came and yelled at us and told us they were going to call the cops on us because it's illegal in Arizona to damage a saguaro cactus. And we had legitimate fears. We rode our bikes home and didn't tell anyone and just prayed that, again, the feds did not show up.
Link in the show notes for those little nuggets about
You know what? You just
cacti.
unlocked a core memory. I picked California poppies as a kid, and somebody told me that was illegal because it was a state flower, and I went on the down low for a little bit.
Yeah, you have to
nobody
hide.
tell anyone I picked those cool. I lived in the Hayward Hills. They just grew, but I guess you're not supposed to pick them.
There's a list that you're on somewhere. They're still looking for you.
I'm sure. 8-year-old Heather busted. Okay, I looked up a few more rules. Don't worry, you're not alone. In New Jersey, it's illegal to sell handcuffs to anyone under the age of 18.
It's a good rule. They don't need them.
I immediately thought, who would put that to the proper use? Nobody has a minor.
Correct.
In Ohio, it's illegal to kill, shoot, or maim a homing pigeon unless you are the owner.
I don't like that clarifier. I wish it was just in general illegal.
This one's for you, Preston. In Arizona, having a donkey sleeping in your bathtub is illegal, but only after 7 p.m.
I've got to call my dad. He has some changes to make.
I'm wondering if it resets at 1 a.m. this morning. And then last one in Walnut, California, which is down south. It's illegal to fly a kite higher than 10 feet off the ground. And now I'm wondering, what kind of things do they have in the air that they're not letting children fly kites? I don't know.
10
Brian?
feet is not that.
It's not that high.
It's like a basketball hoop. So.
Yeah, it's like a tall person lifting their arm. It's not that high.
True. Yeah, I found a couple of fun ones. Fairbanks, Alaska, illegal to give a moose any alcoholic beverages in the city. So no drunk moose around. Calaveras, California. Of course, California, the best for laws. Ooh. It's illegal to eat a frog if it died during a frog jumping competition.
My parents have 100% been to that frog jumping competition.
Wait, that's real?
Yeah, it's
it's
right
big.
up by Angels Camp where we like to go. It's up there.
Yeah, it's so good.
It's the Arnold High School's mascot is the bullfrog.
Do they train the frogs? Do
No, they
just
like
catch
scare
random
them.
Frog? What?
But wouldn't you think it would be good to eat the frog? Like, I mean, their muscles would be more defined, be meatier.
Have you eaten a frog?
Yeah, frog legs.
My dad made me eat frog legs.
What?
I didn't talk to him for a while afterwards. I love you, Dad, but you made me eat gross food at that Chinese restaurant.
Why is this so common? I've never been offered frog legs.
Well, here's a final one just to blow your mind. That in Delaware, it's against the law for a pawnbroker to accept an artificial limb or wheelchair as payment. So
as payment?
As payment, yes.
Just haggling.
As payment, yeah. We're gonna haggle over. But so are you telling me? Don't elaborate. I don't know. I've never been to Delaware.
Hold on, I have a really important joke.
Okay.
Are you telling me things can't cost an arm and a leg? At a pawn shop in Delaware.
Insert the.
Thanks so much. Tag, you're it.
Not the ting ting. The lim.
Oh gosh.
We are nowhere going to be on YouTube for this one. That's for sure.
Okay,
Steve,
let's get back on track.
Please. Were we ever on track?
Donkeys,
to be on track?
The kites, the bullfrogs, and the artificial limbs.
All right.
Preston, at the beginning of your message, you briefly mentioned that the Jews and the Samaritans had a history of conflict. I know you said we were going to talk about it further on the 99. So it was really out of the norm that Jesus and the Samaritan woman were having a conversation at the well. Can you help unpack what led to why it was so crazy that they were in the middle of this conversation at all?
Yeah, there's so much history between the Jews and the Samaritans that goes all the way back, even to like the 700 BC range.
Okay.
The Assyrians, they conquered Israel and they took most of the people into their own captivity. They decided they were going to be slaves. They were taken over. But there were some people that they left behind. There's some people that fled and all that. Like they just stayed back there. Okay. Then, like 100 years later, Judah fell to Babylon in like the 600 range, and there more people were taken off into captivity. And just over like years and years and years, we just keep seeing the people of Israel being conquered and taken. We read about so much of that history even in the Bible, like in our 1st and 2nd Kings. We read all that stuff. But a long time after all that, some of the captors say, hey, you know what? Why don't you all go back to rebuild Jerusalem? And it's like over like 40, 50,000 people, they can go back and rebuild Jerusalem. And the people who are already there, the Samaritans, were super excited. They're like, hey, you can come on back. Welcome back to our town. We can all integrate together. But the people of Israel who had spent generations and generations in captivity and slavery and all the ruthless, they go, hold on. You guys aren't us. You've been sitting here in this place, living this happy little life, and which wasn't exactly the case, but it was very much this racial and just like historical family conflict where the people who thought they were the true Jews, the true people of Israel, they were much more equipped and held down and all this stuff than the Samaritans were. So what the Samaritans were saying, welcome back, the Jews said, you are not us. You're in our space. You got to go. And from then on, it was battles and wars and racism and kicking the Samaritans out and trying to reestablish the nation for the Jews and the Samaritans trying to reestablish their nation all together. And it just kind of spiraled from there all the way to the point where, like, at one point, the Samaritans established their own community. They established their own places of worship, and the Jews actually like go and destroy it in one of their many battles and conflicts. They completely destroy the temple up on Mount Gerizim, which is one of the places we talked about in the sermon. They totally destroy it. And the Samaritans actually didn't rebuild those ruins for hundreds of years. They were worshiping in ruins. So every
In the
time they
rubble.
went in the rubble.
Wow.
So every time they went to worship God, like the same God that the Jews were worshiping, with like some differences in understanding of theology, but they were worshiping the same God. They were doing it among ruins that the people who hated them caused. So this woman at the well is looking at Jesus like, you're the face of the people who destroyed our place of worship. Like, how dare you be talking to me, before she realizes he is the Messiah and who he says he is. There is so much history and hatred wrapped into that line at the beginning of John 4, where she says, you are a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, we do not interact. It is so much deeper than they just live on different sides of the block.
Yeah, but and what I loved about that is that if you don't take the time to kind of unpack and kind of pick away at that little bit of a flap that's like, ooh, what's more there, you miss out on that. And so some of the stuff that when Jesus is interacting with the Samaritan woman, it gives it that much more weight. Like when she says like, we're in rubble and you're, it's like, whoa, okay, that's a big deal, So, and for us to also, I always want to make sure that we look at it is that Jesus chose to go to Samaria, that he could have went around it like everybody else does, but he says, no, I have to go through Samaria, which again, to the local religious officials, like we talked about last week, they hated that he was actually going to go through a place that he wasn't supposed to go. But that's Jesus. He's always going to the place where he needs to go, not where people tell him he should go.
Yeah, I love that he's not afraid of it and he doesn't go around it. But I would say it'd be very hard for me if there was just daily reminders everywhere I looked of maybe what was taken from me or the captivity I was in.
Yeah.
That would be really hard to just say, oh, you're giving me a big welcome home hug. Well, I don't want that. I want you to leave and I want where I was back.
Right.
Well,
And especially as he like kind of ignores, or you could read it as ignores, you could read it as diminishes. On this side of history, we can read it as like redefines, but he doesn't give in to her, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. He does mention like, I recognize it. We worship in different places, but soon that won't be the case. But he regularly is just like, no, you're a child of God. And she's like, no, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. He goes, no, you're a child of God, and let me offer you this living water. Like he is not skating around this cultural difference. He's taking it head on. He goes, I hear your cultural differences, and I don't care because I am the truth, and this is what I have to give you. He plows right through it.
okay, this is reminding me in maybe October, November, we were talking just about politics and Christianity. Election day was coming. Fast forward, now we're in January. Inauguration day has passed, and for so many people, their hopes have been crushed or their hopes and dreams have come true. But one thing I just remember that we talked about, and just as a Christian should always be true, is that we're first and foremost a child of God, which is why in our pyramid of priorities, it goes God, spouse, kids, everything else, because politics falls into everything else, my job title, the way I look, the amount of friends I have, the kind of house I live in, like all of those things are everything else. And God's supposed to be number one. And when we get that out of whack, more than anything, it affects us and our walk with the Lord when we allow anything else to become an idol and have that number one spot in our life.
I was just talking to the kids at Sierra High School actually about that FCA, like what is your identity? And I think that's really what we're kind of coming down to. And
absolutely.
So shout out to Sierra High School. Good to have. Thanks for having me, guys. But and I also would say when not a lot about the election stuff, but I do think that there is this sense. There still is this real deep sense of almost unattainable optimism, and also this like deep like depression almost that's out there, that it just continues to get wider and wider of how people are feeling in the season. And what I love about Jesus, and to come back to what Preston said, is that you don't skirt around those things. Jesus always goes just like right through the middle of them, because that's usually where Jesus is at. Like he's trying to bring people back to this midline of reality and of purity. And I think that that's what's awesome about Christ, is that he's saying, hey, just look to me. Like, just look to me. And he'd even go so far as to, up next, talk to himself about living water and where's life really coming from. And I would challenge all of us that call ourselves Christians to really look to Jesus in this season and not make it about the highs and lows of the political waters that we're in.
Yeah, one of the interesting changes in just like young people development and in culture we saw for a while that, talking about mental health or just even the understanding of how you're feeling, how you're doing, more so than just like, oh, I'm just down today. It was so held back, sometimes just like as a cultural reason of like, we just don't talk about that thing, but also just due to a lack of understanding. We're in this age where information is overloading to the point where it's probably too much. But young people have never been more equipped with information on how to talk about their emotions, how to talk on their development, how to talk about their mental health, for good or for bad. I'd lean mostly for good, but there is some bad instances to it.
Yeah.
But with that, we see young people today understanding their mental health more and understanding their world more, but it leans too far into them identifying as that problem or that crisis or that issue. They have all the tools to recognize and understand it, but it engulfs their identity. And that's why, like, I love what you talked about with like the FCA. It's what we talk about all the time in our high school ministry and with our young adults is, who are you? Like, and who you are is what defines you.
Yeah.
It's not how you feel. It's not, the crisis that you're in. It is your definition is like, I have been changed by Jesus, and Jesus is my identity. I will live as such, regardless of the things that are plaguing you or attacking you.
Well, to that point, though, I think throughout history, whatever the cultural cherry on top in the moment, like what people are looking at. So for instance, like I can remember before mental health was really like a common conversation that people would have, if you had an ailment of any sort, so whether it was cancer or whether it was even an injury that you had, if you're not careful, you can be consumed by the thing. And I'm thinking about people in our church that are battling through things like Peter Medeiros and other people that are just battling through certain Tiffany and Aaron, our friend Aaron, that's battling through breast cancer. Like if you're not careful, you can really say, well, I am, insert your name here, the person that is the cancer person, or but you're not. Like you're battling through this thing, but you're a child of God. Like you are God's, and He loves you. And what I love about all those people that I mentioned is that God is the one that is the foremost, but they are defined by a child of God. Hi, my name is Brian, and I'm a child of God, but I am battling whatever, I think that's the better way to look at it. But now for our young adults and for our young people, I mean, I see too often, like if they get the diagnosis or get the thing, it's almost like this, like, oh, now I'm that. And so now I can be defined by that. And you could see that going throughout all different things as far as gender identity and all the different identities that are out there. I'm this thing instead of, no, I am a child of God. And I think coming back to the Samaritan woman, she could easily have just said, hey, I'm a Samaritan. What? That's all I are, And Jesus is like, oh no, you're more than that. Like I'm an adulteress, or I'm this, or I'm that. No, you're more than that. And let me show you what that means.
Yeah, you actually, both of you just nailed what we're talking about in middle school right now. We're just in the middle of a series on our feelings called Happily Ever After and Everything Before. And it's called that because our feelings aren't always accurate indicators of the truth. Our feelings are true in a sense of we are feeling them, but it doesn't make it accurate. And so we always have to look to the source of where truth and where feelings were even created and came from.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I love everything you guys just said. And Brian, you said it before, Preston, you were talking about it in your message, but you had shared that Jesus asked the Samaritan woman for a drink of water, and she responds almost kind of like in a sarcastic way. I think you phrase it as we don't talk, buddy. But Jesus' response in verse 10, so this John chapter 4, verse 10 says, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. So he kind of ignores her, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, and he speaks to her as who she is, just her. So we see Jesus offers her living water, and then the woman understands what Jesus is implying, that he's greater than Jacob, greater than the well that the water is coming from, and he's the offering that if she receives it, will never be thirsty again. Can we talk some more about Jesus being the living water?
Yeah, this point of him being living water and explaining to the woman what he's talking about relates, in my mind, to when Jesus constantly talks to his disciples about him being like the bread of life, or him being the satisfaction. My wife Cass and I have been laughing a lot lately about whenever Jesus has these talks with his disciples, and we chalk it up to just dudes being guys, because Jesus is like, hey, I'm the bread of life, and if you consume me, you'll live forever. Like, you don't have to worry about anything. And what they should take away from that is like, oh, he's the Son of God, will be forever fulfilled. And he even explains it as such. But then it'll say some quip of the disciples being like, wait, so is Jesus mad about the bread that we forgot? Is that the point of this? And it's just like them just totally not understanding. Jesus is being really clear to her here. Like, I am living water. You will not thirst again. You do not have to like seek anything anymore. And she's really caught up with like, okay, yeah, but I need water. And this well, it's pretty good water actually. My ancestors drank from it, so I don't know who you are. And I just love how clear he's being, and we can see that on this side. And she had it revealed to her as she like recognized him as the Messiah. And Jesus actually like apparently goes and teaches the people of the town, as it says when they're like, we believed in your words, but now Jesus talked. So he apparently went and like did teaching, and they all came to know him. I love that he is so clearly saying, I'm living water. It is eternal, crystal clear. And we get to accept that now. And the Bible is littered with examples of how fulfilling water is and living water. Like when someone who knew the Old Testament heard that, they would chalk up the water imagery to so much throughout Scripture, not just this instant example that he had.
Yeah, Old Testament's got all kinds of things. Anytime you see water, it's usually referring to, like, for instance, purity. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the mikvahs, where there were the ceremonial bathing that would take place by the bride before the bridegroom would come back. And there's always life. You see in the creation story that when God created and separated the waters and everything, that there was life that was teeming within there. And then we also see when Moses, when God allowed the river to become blood, like it took out the life of the water. Cleanliness was with water. The idea of cleansing yourself from a new life in baptism. There's power in water with the Red Sea parting in Exodus. And not to mention that when a well was dug, it meant that there was life to that community that it served. I saw that firsthand in Zambia when we had a chance through World Vision, that when they dig wells, towns will come up from that area because there is living water that's there. And again, we see at Jacob's well that there was everything builds up out of that. And so there's water there. And so she's coming for the physical nourishment and the idea that you need food and shelter and water, like the main things that you need. But Jesus is like, there's actually something more that you need. It's not about H2O. It's about salvation. It's about eternal life. And so this is really what you should build your life off of. Not just this water source for your community, but this water source for your soul.
Well, yeah, there's a bunch of verses in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
A few that come to mind: Jeremiah 2:13, we'll link in the notes. Zechariah 14:8, Ezekiel 4:7-9. There's several areas where you can look and see that God is referenced as the living water in the Old Testament too. Yeah. So this isn't a new thing just with Jesus. God is saying, hey, you gotta look for me to provide the living water in your life. Preston?
And she would have known that too, right? Because being a Samaritan, being a Jew, like she would have heard those verses too. So
yeah, it's so littered in like our Old Testament history, but even like today reflects like how water is so symbolic of so much more than just like something that just is sitting there. When I was reading about the history of Jacob's well, seeing where it like came from, obviously like it was no indication in the Bible of where exactly like Jacob dug this well, but it's relatively understood that Jacob had this plot of land. This is around the area where we believe that Jacob, his land ownership was, so it makes sense that that would be there. But the history of like this well, I mentioned that in 330 AD, it was recognized that's Jacob's well. Around 400 AD, a church built itself around the well. It like centered, like this is an important thing. We're going to build a church around it. Then it was destroyed in Samaritan revolt in like 500 AD. Then it was rebuilt in 700 AD. Then it was occupied and stolen and taken over in like 1100 AD. In like the 12th century, it was destroyed again in like the 12th century era. And then again in 1500, it was rebuilt. And like there's just so much destruction, rebuilding to what we see now with like another rebuilding of a church around it. Like so much significance of just human life and human flourishing centers around this water. And yet through it all, Jesus says, oh, I'm so much better than this well you guys are fighting over or building things around.
Well, and we get, and I think you get caught up on the well itself. It goes back to identity. Like you're like, if we lose the well, then we lose. But no, it's about Jesus, and so the symbolism is great, and all of that. Like even if we were to get like really like serious about it, and let's say something happened where they wiped out all the things in Bethlehem, and we didn't have this, and we didn't have that, all the places that we've I think Heather, you and I have been able to see in our different trips to Israel, but we still have Jesus, like we still have a living Savior, and that's the thing that we hold on to, and I would hope, again, for us as Christians, we don't want to hold on to things, we want to hold on to the main thing, and that's Jesus, and so that's why Jesus is saying, you want this living water that will quench your true thirst that you need, and it's actually, Jacob's well is great, but I'm actually better than that.
Oh yeah, there's for some reason as Christians we always like to add the little asterisk onto something to say, but also this.
Yeah. Oh
like,
yeah.
Here's the thing you need, and
Totally.
we even started to talk about this earlier, Preston, but you started that at the top of your message with the thread of just the cultural rules and the customs throughout the message.
Yeah.
You talked about the Samaritan woman, came initially close to missing what Christ was offering on account of the cultural differences. And as Christians, I think we can all be guilty of this. So Preston, Brian, what are maybe a few more cultural rules or norms that come to mind that you see keeping like modern day Christians from connecting with Christ or connecting with others? What do you think those might be?
When I talk to the youth, when I talk to when I talk to high schoolers and young adults,
I love them.
Sometimes I think like, oh, their problems are so much more different than mine or like other adults, and they're really not. Like it's the same problems, just in a different setting. Like high school's no joke, and I think every year that goes by is probably a harder time to be in high school than the year that went by before. But the problems are always the same. So some of the things like I talk with students about is they're like, well, I don't want to be like the weird Jesus kid. Like I don't want to be that. And I'm like, come on, you're better than that. But then I think about it. And it's like, I don't want to be the weird Jesus guy at the car shop or the mechanic shop when I'm like talking to the employees. I don't want to be the weird Jesus guy at the grocery store. And that is like a posture that is unreasonable for me to have. Like it's not about not being the weird Jesus guy. It's about like, hey, here's this truth that I think is really important and living life that reflects it as such. Not even just talking about like vocal evangelism, but just like social pressures and peer pressure and cultural pressure. I think that exists a lot with everyone. I also think time and busyness. I hear so many students talk about, well, I'm so busy because of sports and my job and my grades and my family. And I'm like, yeah, but don't you have time to read a little bit of scripture or pray a bit more? And they say no, and I'm like, that's not true. But then I think about days that I've had where I go, oh, I was just too busy. Meanwhile, I definitely looked at 3 TikToks, which could have been a chapter of scripture. Yeah. I for sure had a commute where I could have been like turning off the radio and having a conversation with God or listening to the audio Bible. Like there's so many excuses that we all run into against. I think culturally it's easy to say, I'm just too busy or I don't want to be weird. But man, those keep us from where we need to be at. And I get convicted regularly talking to students about that.
Yeah, especially as a parent, you're talking to your kids and, saying one thing and you're like, I'm not doing that either. But, I hear a lot, you hear these oftentimes like, hey, we don't talk about religion and politics in mixed company. That's one of the things that the unwritten rule, right? You don't do that. But are there more powerful things in the world right now than those 2 things? I'm not sure. And then God's just for Sunday, not for the weekends. You just kind of put them in a box and we'll talk about them on Sunday, but let's not bring them out of that box during the week. I always, as you're driving by, you always see the coexist bumper stickers out there. All religions are the same. They are not all the same. Were you to ask the other religions, they would also say that same thing, that we're not the same. And the idea of coexisting, I think, keeps people from really, that's an unwritten rule. Like it's just easier to coexist than actually to have a place that you stand on. Or when you use God when it's convenient to get a lot of likes. I think that's another way that a cultural way that we do that, because it's always fun to be able to see those, the tick marks go up when you use God. And then I think just with the idea of cultural relativism, cultural moral relativism is so there that we can talk about God, but what are we really talking about? Are we talking about the God of the Bible? Are we talking about the lowercase g God? Are we talking about just being a good person? So all of those keep us from that. But, one thing that you said, Preston, I think it's interesting is we say, wow, I don't want to be the Jesus freak. I don't want to be that guy. And yeah, maybe we don't want to be the pariah of the school where it's, like, oh my gosh.
That.
Turn and burn, baby.
But yeah, and I mean, I go back to when I was in college, and I remember like one of my first few weeks of going to college, and we had this, it was called Harper, Schramm, and Smith dorm, 10,000 kids in these like huge dormitories. And there was this one common spot right in the middle where, I remember going to Harper, Schramm, and Smith dormitory. There was these 10,000 kids in these 3 different dormitories. Right in the middle was a commons area, and there was this weirdo guy that would just yell every day from the top of his lungs that we're all going to hell and everything. And I came up to him one day. I'm like, dude, you are killing this for us Christians. He's like, you're going to hell too. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. But I do think even though there's that impression, there is the impression that's like, man, I would love to be the person that could share my faith boldly with somebody. And I would love to be the person that
confidently.
Yeah, that actually like people respected because of that. And I think we sometimes will swing the pendulum so far out of fear that we'll be the guy that's like the sandwich board guy in the middle of the dormitory, as opposed to, or the guy that never says anything, that we just say, I can't do it. I just throw my hands up in the air. And Satan wins in those moments. But every day there's opportunity. Who are you before Jesus? How'd you find Jesus? What was it like after you found Jesus? Those moments are around every single day if we just take advantage of them. It's not that hard. I always say the first rule is what? Don't be weird. Don't be weird, and then people are going to listen to you more. So.
What happens if that's a natural part of your personality? I'm asking for a friend.
If you're just weird?
Yeah, I'm just a little weird sometimes in general. Yeah. But I just use it towards my advantage. Hopefully.
Yeah. You got to lean into what God gave you.
Lean into what God gave me.
Because I think it's authenticity, right? You can tell if someone is authentically caring about you, saying, here's a truth that I am very passionate about, versus... I think you're a worse person than me, and you will be punished accordingly. I will never forget one of my friends that I've played games with for years and years, who is very vocally anti all things Christian and God and religion, telling me, because I had some mention of like the gospel and of Jesus, and I, in like embarrassment, was like, oh, but I don't want to like push this on you too much, which like I was kind of like taking a step back. And I remember he later told me, he said, hey, I don't agree with anything you said, but if you believe it and you actually think that like there is punishment for the way that I'm living, like thanks for telling me that. And like he meant it authentically. Yeah. And I'll never forget, like if I authentically care about someone, I'm going to tell them the truth. And I'm going to do it in love, not in like out of like them trying to be afraid of what I'm saying. But I love you. Here's a truth that I think is really important. As long as it's authentic, I think it's good.
Which is exactly what Jesus did to the Samaritan woman, right?
He
in
did.
Verse 30, what was it, 38, I think, or 39?
Yep. And if you look at 38, you look at 39, you look at 40, you see that Jesus is talking to her, and he's basically able to tell her like all these things she's ever done. Yeah. And most people are probably avoiding a woman at that time that has had 5 husbands and is now living with someone who's not one of the 5 husbands. Yeah. And it's easy to avoid, but time and time again, we see God just walk towards the hard conversation, willing to engage with everybody because, John 3:16, he loves the whole world, so his death was for everybody, not just for some, for those who, choose to take advantage. And so this encounter with Jesus ends up taking her away from being an outcast into an evangelist who's willing to tell people about who Jesus is because she realizes he's who he says he is. And then I think what's easy to listen and be like, that lady sucks a little bit. Yeah. Like, why would you make that many choices when really we are the woman in the story?
Yeah, that was my biggest revelation reading through this, because I've heard this message preached before, and when I first understood, like, oh dang, this is why she's all alone. Oh wow, this is like the cultural faux pas of her life. I remember that being a really big turning point in my understanding of the story, and going through this again, like to now teach it instead of just receive it. I realized a really cool point of we have no idea why she's had 5 husbands. No clue. Yep. She could have been 100% at fault, and she could have been the reason, and she could be flying through these marriages, and she's the problem. Yeah. Or she could be a broken, dejected, rejected culturally outcast woman who has been hurt time and time again and is just so tired of taking the abuse and slander that she's staying away from everyone. We have no idea which camp she falls into.
Right.
And the beautiful part is that it does not matter. It doesn't change
Not at all.
how Jesus approaches her. It doesn't change the offer that he has for her. None of that matters. And I think that is such a beautiful piece of informational omission to say, whether she's on the hurt side of the coin or the attacker side of the coin, the offer is the same. The living water stands. And I think I love that piece of it.
Well, that's why if we will agree that we're the Samaritan woman, then we realize that we are an outcast, that we're ones that are dehydrated from the water that isn't alive around us, that we are the ones that you can fill in the blank, that have done all the different things. I mean, her sin was what we described. Was it a sin? Maybe it wasn't, But at the same time, we also the ones that we get to share the gospel with the world. And we also the ones that have a story to tell. And we're the ones who know who we were before Jesus, how we met him, and who we are after him. And so we too, in the fullness of who that woman is, we are in that same exact vein, and that's I think why I'm so grateful that the story is in the Gospel of John, because it would be very easy for this to be a forgettable moment, but this is one that John leans in and says we can't forget this moment, because we're all at that well, and we all are potentially missing out on the real water that we need. So
That was a big understanding that I had in college. I made that, I had that point about how everyone was sharing their deep, dark trauma stories. And I just felt super inadequate.
Christian college, which again, we're coming back to that. We are going to do a Christian college episode, I think.
Of the truths of Christian college.
Oh, I told Sean, I was like, I bet I could do a whole couple seasons of a podcast on this.
Oh boy. Yeah. It's
This is off topic.
World.
You shared the crazy thing about people getting engaged quick, but at small Christian colleges, you guys don't even know. That wasn't an absurd statement that you made. That was so on track.
Not at all. I know two people who started dating and were married 2 weeks later. No exaggeration, nothing. They now have 3 kids, and according to Facebook, they're happily married. And I believe
Facebook
them
never lies.
They're wonderful people. I trust them.
Must be true.
Must be.
I hope so. But
Okay, carry on with your theological thought.
So when I was in that feeling of like, man, my story and everything is super inadequate. I've heard other typically youth pastors joke like, man, I should have been a worse kid. I would have had a better story for these high schoolers, which they hopefully don't mean. But I remember a big turning point in probably like my second or third year of school where I realized that my story was just as broken as these people with super broken backgrounds and stories, in the sense that we both came from sin, we both repented and both turned. Now, they had to overcome more than I did, and they might have had more resilience or everything like that, so nothing to take away from them, but we both went from 100% sinner to 100% saved. And at that point is where I started being unashamed of what I had to say and recognizing, and I've even seen the fruits of it here at this church, of there are kids who think they've got it made and they're good to go with Jesus because they get good grades, don't get in trouble, and come to church every once in a while. And they're like, oh, dude, I got this down.
Nailed it. Yep.
And I look at them, I'm like, I was you, and I did not know Jesus.
Yep.
I'd never had anyone say to me what they said to you of like in your meeting in college of, if you ever want to be a real Christian, let me know.
Yeah.
But I should have. I should have had that though, because I thought I was good to go, golden. And I've had so many good conversations result out of that experience with students today, as the other people who are involved in our ministry who have had much different backgrounds, who can speak to the kids who have much different backgrounds. So all of our stories, no matter what side of the pendulum they're on, they can be used to glorify Jesus and bring other people to him. Your testimony matters no matter what.
I love the fact that when we get together, we can talk a long time. So this has been a really good episode.
Yeah, we could talk for forever.
What I'm grateful for is that we've got other episodes. We got all kinds that can unpack all this other good, meaty stuff. It's been good. So
we
I
do,
love it.
and we have a God who's in the business of change. We all need to be changed. And so none of us are starting at a higher place than others. It's trusting in who he is. And so
Amen.
Preston, I appreciated that you called us to live a changed life, because we're a changed person, because we get to trust in God who changes people. So thank you for that. When you were wrapping up your message, you kind of just asked one of these last questions. Maybe you're ready to have your life radically changed by Jesus. So can you just throw out a few ways someone might begin allowing Jesus to radically change them if they don't know where to start?
The first step is the decision. It is your decision to say, from this point on, I'm going to face Jesus. It's not there's nothing magical snap of the fingers that makes you like, oh, I'm going to go now. It is the whole, word repentance is just turning away from your old life and stepping into the new. So the first step in deciding to follow Jesus, it sounds dumb, but it is just deciding to follow Jesus. Okay. And when you've made that decision, that's where getting plugged in with like the next steps that the church offers can help. That's where getting involved in a group and finding people who are older and wiser and have been doing this longer. That's where talking with a pastor or an accountability partner. That's where like you start to take these next steps of all the things that the church offers, and not just like Crossroads Church, but the Big C Church, all things that God offers, and just dive into Scripture. If you decide to follow Jesus, start reading Jesus' words.
Brian's nodding his head in agreement, as am I. Preston, Brian, thank you for such a great conversation this week. Brian, what do you have for us next week when it comes to John 5?
Next week, we start the next season, Selfless Jesus, looking at some of those miracles that he's out there. And honestly, important part of the gospel to be able to look at is Jesus is both the divine and the human at the very same time. This incarnation thing keeps coming back to us, but you're not going to want to miss it. A great chance to invite one. We talk about the miracles, easy invitation. So invite your one, invite your friends. It's going to be a great time. Can't wait to be a part of it.
Sweet. Preston, you have any fun announcements you want to make before we wrap up today?
Oh boy, the biggest announcement is that next week you get to hear me and Brian mano y mano.
Let's go. Full contact podcasting.
We're gonna. I don't even know what we're gonna do. It's gonna be
It'll
wonderful.
Be so good. Preston's gonna be the first guest host of the 99 podcast ever. I'm gonna be out of the country for a quick minute. I'll come back. Don't worry. If you cheered, you're just gonna have to wait till Preston is preaching again to get.
Well,
to
and Heather, I really applaud you. You tried really hard to find somebody else, but you did the best you could, and so
Sometimes the Lord closes doors.
Like a moth to a flame, it all comes back, baby.
Yeah, I'm excited. Don't forget, check the show notes below. If you have any questions, you can submit it there. You could find all the links to any info you might need. And Brian, Preston, who's going to take it away? They're thumb wrestling right now.
Well, I need to practice for next week, so
let's go.
Tag, you're it.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next weekend at Crossroads on campus or online for one of our 4 weekend services. To view our service times, make sure you check out our website at crossroadsgrace.org. Tag, you're it.